The Oral History Criminology Project, in conjunction with the American Society of Criminology, is pleased to present the conversation with Cheryl L. Maxson. We're joined today in her office here at the University of California at Irvine, March 16th, 2017. Before we get into the substance of her, the arc of her career, I think it's best to give a little bit of a profile of her for those of you reviewing who aren't familiar with the thrust of her work. She began her academic career in 1974 with a BA from Occidental College, that's in LA, in sociology, continuing along the study of sociology, earning an MA in 1978 and a PhD in 1983, both from the University of Southern California in sociology. From that point, she began pursuing a number of different academic positions, held a number of different academic positions in 1983, segueing from the dissertation to a research assistant professor at USC in sociology in 1993, promoted to research associate professor at USC as well. From 1993 to the year 2000, she served as director of the Center for Research in Crime and Social Control at the Social Science Research Institute at USC. In 2000, she came here to the University of California at Irvine as an assistant professor, climbing the ranks to associate in 2003. 2014, named full professor, and currently serves as department chair from 2014 until present day as well. She's also named as affiliate faculty in the Masters of Public Policy in 2011. She's also held a number of visiting positions, and hopefully I don't trip over the term, the alliteration here. The International Institute for the Sociology of Law in Onati, Spain, and as well as at the Institute of Criminology at the University of Tübingen,
close enough.
Oh, right, Germany. Over the course of her career, she's been acknowledged in a number of different regards, earning awards and distinctions, several from the Western Society of Criminology. Served as president in 1997, earned the Joseph Lohman Award in 1999, awarded fellow distinction in the year 2003, and also earned the coveted Paul Tappen Award in 2009. From the American Society of Criminology, she served as executive counselor from 1999 to 2002, vice president from 2009 to 2011, and named fellow of ASC in 2015. She lists as her research interests what we hope to kind of elaborate on a little bit more depth and detail: youth violence, juvenile justice system, community-based responses to crime, policing street gangs, and program evaluation. I suppose without further ado, maybe we ought to start at the beginning. So could you sketch out a little bit of a portrait of your life before you begin to the academic pursuit?
You mean from the beginning, really?
Literally? When I was born?
Yeah, I was born, I was raised. And,
are there anything that you think are sort of relevant to kind of explaining your path into criminology?
That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that. I was raised in a small town on the border of Mexico in the middle of the desert. And when I went to college in Los Angeles, I thought, big city, great time. And so I think, I've always been attracted to urban issues because of that. I was just really, really excited about that. But in terms of personal experiences, engaging in juvenile delinquency gangs, whatnot,
right.
that would not be the case.
Okay.
Not be the case.
Okay. I noticed you did a dissertation on sort of legislative protocol.
Right.
How does one work from that element of sociology to gangs and criminology?
Yeah.
It seems like a real stretch, but for you it may not have been.
No, actually it wasn't. I became interested in street gangs when I was in college. I took a juvenile delinquency class. My mentor, Mike McAleen, there at Oxy, was aware of Matt Klein's work, had met him before, and when I became super interested in street gangs, he really, pointed me in that direction. For those of you that are familiar with Mac's early work, he famously said in 1971, "I'm done with gangs," and so that was just about my time. So since he wasn't interested in gangs,
Did he not direct your dissertation?
He did.
He did?
He did.
Huh.
He did. But I was really on my way elsewhere. I'd spent a year after I graduated from college to see if I loved doing research. And
Yeah.
I spent a year trying to see if I could get a research job without
All
an
right.
advanced degree.
Yeah.
And just happened to be in San Francisco, right? Highest unemployment rate for PhDs in the country, probably.
Yeah.
So I was working at Rolling Stone magazine, pushing paper
No
around.
kidding.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get that job in research when I got the call from Mac offering me a research assistant position at USC, or actually suggesting I come down to visit him
Okay.
to see if there was a good match. And this is actually kind of a funny story because
Yeah.
he kept calling me Sister Cheryl. And, I'm like, it's the 70s, I'm working at Rolling Stone magazine,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, boy, this guy is really cool, right? Feminist, the whole thing. So when we did the interview, he kept asking me. He was doing a project, really interesting project, that involved interviewing youth all over LA County. And we can talk more about that later if you want. But anyway, he kept saying, well, sister, would you feel comfortable going into these areas? Would you
Yeah.
feel comfortable interviewing youth about their criminal activities? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Well, of course, it turned out there was a mistake on my application, and he thought I was a nun. So I by then I was already taken with the whole thing. So.
Now, I suppose that this was probably during an era in which women weren't really all that present, or as present as they are.
Absolutely.
And certainly the numbers that they are
Absolutely.
today.
Right, yeah. And that I think that experience that I had working on those early research grants, it was just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I was totally hooked.
Yeah.
But my dissertation actually looked at the kind of development and the machinations and the development of a large omnibus juvenile justice bill in California.
Okay.
So, and actually that kind of led, one of my areas, I mean, there was a lot going on at SE in that time
Yeah.
in the area, study of deviance.
Okay.
And so I got exposed to a lot of things when I was in graduate school and really received some great training.
Now, was that under the auspices of the research center that you worked for, the Center for Research on Crime and Social Control?
So that was within, I think Mac probably ran his grants through that institute.
Okay.
But it was while I was in graduate school
Yeah.
in sociology.
So how do you work from a research appointment into kind of an academic kind of thing?
Yeah. So after when I was coming close to graduate, there was this opportunity to evaluate a large gang program
All right.
that was starting up in LA, and so Mac, I think, decided that perhaps the time was right, and he knew I was always interested in gang research. So we applied for a grant from NIJ and kind of got back into doing that research. And I just, as luck would have it, I just happened to get into doing gang research at the time when juvenile violence was exploding.
Okay.
There was a lot of interest in street gangs, and I never quite got around to applying for a real job.
Yeah.
I just kept getting
Yeah.
grants, and I thought, I'll go on to this one, and so it was kind of a circuitous path.
Okay.
By the time I kind of had been doing that for 15 or so years, really.
Yeah.
I found myself in a situation where I had 4 or 5 grants running at the same time. I had a relatively, I was training a lot of graduate students. I had a staff, and I felt like pretty much all my time was spent writing grants and writing reports.
Yeah.
And so when Joan Petersilia came up to me at a Western Society of Criminology meeting and told me an opening here at UCI, I thought, you know what? Maybe now's a good time to start thinking about a regular academic job. So that's what I did.
Can you give us a little bit about studying at USC? the people that you were exposed to, some of the
Right.
ideas that were kind of around in sociology.
Uh-huh.
There aren't too many sociology programs just historically that have much of a prim presence. And so I suspect that that made it for kind of an ideal circumstance. For,
Oh, it
for
was.
you.
It absolutely was. It was. I feel so fortunate that I landed in that program, without really knowing much about it, except that Matt Klein happened to be there, right?
Right.
I picked most of my graduate school options according to location.
Yeah, right.
But I did end up in LA. So as it happened, at that particular point in time, USC had this concentration of great faculty that were doing just wonderful research in deviance. So I had the opportunity to take juvenile delinquency from Lamar Impey when he was writing his textbook, American Delinquency.
Wow.
So those chapters were our syllabus, actually. Dan Glazer taught me sociological theory. I had a wonderful statistics professor in Jim Lincoln, but they had a NIMH training grant in deviance there, so they had half a dozen fellows, and they brought in what must have been 8 times a year, just people, scholars from across the country. So I had the opportunity to see Travis Hershey and Gil Geis and John Manahan and Lord Humphreys. I mean, it was just, to me, it just built and built and built. I mean, it just kept getting better all the time.
Wow.
So
That's incredible.
it was a great experience.
Yeah.
I
It's nice.
finally got my dissertation done.
Right. Good dissertations are done this stage, right?
Right.
Maybe I think before we get into some of the content, the specifics of your career, I think it might be helpful to kind of give a bit of a kind of a lay of the land here in terms of what gangs were like in LA, of all places, at the time in which you were at USC. There seems to be kind of quite a few elements that kind of are at a nexus that make this an ideal or just a perfect situation in which people can be studying this
Right,
as an
yeah.
emerging phenomenon, and one that really dominated criminology in a lot of ways at an earlier point in time.
Certainly a lot of the criminological theory came out of those studies in the 50s and the 60s. And, I think there was for me, a fortunate confluence of a lot of different dynamics in the sense that much of the literature up to then had really built on more qualitative research. And my interests were primarily quantitative, and there was so much left to be discovered that it was relatively there was so much interesting that was really left to be studied. So I think that really positioned me well in terms of pursuing those interests. But also during graduate school, I was involved in looking at doing some early work on some status offenders. MAC had another grant that looked at a large multi-site evaluation of deinstitutionalization of status offenders. So I was exposed to that while I was working on my dissertation on this law that was deinstitutionalizing status offenders, as well as making changes in the law that increased the probability that youth would be transferred to adult court, and really shoring up some of the responses to serious offenders. So that early work I did in the development of this law really also positioned me well when the Department of Justice wanted to step back and take another look at what was going on nationally with the deinstitutionalization of status offenders again. I could really look at it from a kind of law in books, law in action framework, which I now know from my law and society colleagues here. That work was really, I think, motivated by the desire to look at the way laws were implemented in the area of status offenders. And then the book Responding to Troubled Youth came out of that work. So I just wanted to kind of get that in.
Right.
There was this new innovative program that the city of LA was going to, did implement, actually. It was modeled after a program in Philadelphia that had these ex-gang members, street workers kind of going out in mobile patrol cars responding to rumors and trying to do rumor control and that kind of thing. So I got attached early on in trying to help them develop some tools to help them evaluate while we were getting funding to do some research on gang and non-gang homicides that could then be used as outcome measures for this program.
Okay.
Okay. It's my look into that period of time.
Yeah.
Seems to be that there seems to be an awful lot of hype, an awful lot of hoopla, an awful lot of scary. There's it had a patina to it that is just these are gangs and the super gang argument being kind of front and center. But a lot of your work seems to be about generating the empirical elements that would allow for some legitimate assessment as to whether or not this is the figment of some fevered imagination versus something that's just sort of a group of people who are just sort of shiftless and maybe don't have some real definition in their life. Is that more or less accurate? Or
Yeah,
is
and
this
then I would say that has been a motivating factor in many of the research studies that I've done, and that is when you kind of come against a what we call in street gang patterns and policies, common wisdoms, perceptions, arguments on the part of law enforcement and city officials depicting the street gang situation in a way that doesn't really conform to what we would think it would be like. And so in those early homicide projects, we're able to kind of lay out, ask the question, well, how different are homicides when gang members are involved than other kinds of homicides? And in particular, how are these departments, and in this case it was the LA Police Department and Sheriff's Department, how are they labeling these cases? So to the degree that we get these horrific numbers, and by the peak of in the 90s, they were truly horrific numbers. Were they just making them up, or that kind of thing? And so those early studies in homicides really did show that, by and large, they were being fairly consistent in applying their criteria for how they defined a gang crime.
It seems like one of the age-old debates in the gang literature is how to define. The argument
How to define everything,
right? How do you include or you exclude the issue of the group being committed or consistently, chronically engaged in violence? Is that part of the definitional aspect, or is it something? Is it a complete non-entity? Is this a red herring, or is this a legitimate issue? Has there been progress? Is there kind of an emerging consensus?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty comfortable in including, and in fact, I think it's important to include an orientation towards a knowledge, as we do in the Eurogang definition. An acceptance of crime and violence as part of how you think of that group. Other people would argue that it's tautological. My sense is that, well, there's clearly more or less involvement in criminal activity, over time. So I'm not that uncomfortable with including, but I'm also really very interested in looking to see what, what happens to definitional practices when you change the definitions. That's also been part of my research on homicides as well. So
because you have one foot in the theoretical element, and I think you're right in a lot of ways. The gangs are really a nexus of, this is a sort of where an awful lot of theory is at a crossroads here in terms of explaining this particular phenomenon. But you've also got a foot not only in the theoretical realm, but in the policy realm as well.
Absolutely.
And I suppose that they don't have really much interest in terms of how many angels are dead dancing out of the head of this gang pin here.
Yeah.
So I suppose that that gives you some leverage in both quarters, or how do you navigate
Yeah.
that divide?
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions here in terms of how that?
Right. So compared to what is
Right.
my favorite question
Yes.
there, because having a workable definition of street gangs, acceptable, a consensus definition, then allows you to go about and think about, okay, so what do we see as being the difference between street gangs and other youth groups that also engage in crime?
Right.
And so that I think can be a good kind of entry into talking to law enforcement officials. How important would that it be to them to be able to distinguish street gang activity from other kinds of group activity? And now, of course, there's an ongoing discourse about what we can learn from street gang research to apply to these youth involvement in terrorism, domestic terrorism.
And just to kind of put a finer point on all this proceedings here in terms of the academic debate over gangs,
Right.
gang-defined issues. I think one of my favorite papers, one of my favorite contributions is gang violence, half as great or
Oh, okay, okay,
Right. So
okay.
could you give us some indication as to how that began the process of developing?
Right. A while back, okay. And that again, Irv Spergel pulled together, it must have been 36 people from law enforcement and a few academics to kind of discuss whether or not we might move towards a more uniform definition of gang crime, right? So, of course, a lot of people from LA, a lot of people from Chicago in the room, and famously Chicago at that point in time had a restricted definition of what constitutes a gang crime, is tying it to gang function, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the LA broader definition was more gang member based. And basically, with very few exceptions, if a gang member was involved as a victim or an offender, they would designate that crime as being a gang crime. Right? So I was curious about what what would be the impact of
Right.
that. So I did some analyses on our gang homicides, and was able to really tease out. To the, you're always somewhat limited in terms of the information that's available in these long homicide files. But basically, by applying the Chicago definition to Los Angeles gang homicides, you see a reduction of half. And that's why that twice as great is kind of title there. The interesting thing is that the character of those homicides did not change a whole lot. So even, the basic differences between gang and non-gang homicides are the differences between those two types are stark, and they withstand these differences in gang definitions. So that was kind of, in some ways, an early insight that then we carry over to different approaches to defining gang membership. So, this huge leap in terms of the unit of analysis, but regardless of how you define gang membership, whether it's self-definition or I consider my group of friends a gang, or the application of the Eurogang definition, you net different people in those definitions, but the difference between those people, however you define them, and the people that you're comparing them to, comparably aged youth, are stark.
Seems to be, at an earlier point in time especially, an awful lot of mythology also surrounding this issue of how involved gang members are perceived to be in the drug trade.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of your work pokes holes in some of those pretensions as well. So maybe take us down that path.
So again, this was the period of time when concern about gangs was ramping up to just a dramatic extent. And the perception was that Gangs were increasing across the nation due to big city gang members, Chicago, Los Angeles, fanning out across the nation's roadways, flyways, and byways to set up shop to sell crack cocaine. It was originally called raw cocaine in Los Angeles, but and in very sophisticated marketing efforts, taking advantage of inexperienced law enforcement and then not just setting up cocaine shops, but also, of course, promoting gang issues and expanding gang issues there. So I mean, ultimately, that also moved into the studies that I did on gang migration. But earlier, this idea of these really well-organized, sophisticated operations to sell drugs did not map well onto what we knew about adolescent street gangs. So we were able to do studies that looked at arrests for distribution of cocaine across several years in Los Angeles and also in some neighboring cities, and also look at the drug aspects of gang and non-gang homicide.
Yeah.
So we were able to establish empirically that this perception of this close nexus between gangs, drugs, and violence was a misperception.
Yeah.
It was.
I'm thinking in the present context with terrorism kind of consuming more and more of our
Absolutely.
collective interests.
Right, yeah.
Do these same attributes that don't make them an ideal platform, this organizational style, does that also make them less than optimal outlet for promoting terrorism and recruiting and indoctrinating
You think?
right?
Yeah. I was in a meeting recently where it was small meeting that was sponsored by the United Nations University, where we really talked about what we know about domestic terrorism. And the one thing that was absolutely stark to me is that the average age of the offenders in those events is like 35, right?
Oh.
And that's the average age.
Yeah.
So what can we learn from the literature on the risk for gang joining, the systems processes, that kind of thing from street gangs, youth gangs, to apply to that? I don't know if there's much. I'm skeptical about it. But I certainly agree that over the last many decades now, street gangs and street gang members have been, demonized.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no question about that, and why that's a convenient foil for some of these, really draconian interventions.
Yeah.
I think is a different conversation.
Yeah.
Does this look any different on the European landscape? Because you do have you have a foothold here domestically, but you also
Right.
have an awful lot of expertise acquired from your studies with the Eurogang project as well.
Yeah. My involvement in that group has been one of the great joys of my career, I must say.
Yeah.
So, one of the things to know about the European research is that it tends to be, while we've really dedicated ourselves to this program of research that's really emphasized quantitative work, their work tends to be more qualitative. But when we make comparisons about the nature of the relationship between gang involvement and crime. Same. When we look at the structural typology that Mac and I developed, it maps very well over the kinds of groups that they have. Of course, a big difference is access to guns.
Oh, which certainly ratchets up the level of violence.
Yeah. And you know, clearly there are different patterns of race and ethnicity.
Yes.
Related to their different patterns of migration and immigration. But you know, I'd have to say the group processes in youth groups are remarkably resilient, you know, to time and space.
Are they built around different kinds of ideologies, if you will, or orienting ethos?
So I think in Scandinavia and various places in Europe, the youth groups would have more of a skinhead quality.
Okay.
That's, you know,
a hate group kind of
hate group
idea.
more.
Okay.
And I would say that would be a stronger marker in places like Oslo and Copenhagen, but still they continue to have those kind of neighborhood youth groups that identify and get involved in protection of territory, in
Ethnic identity, is that an element over there as well?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm thinking of, so we talked a little bit about sort of from the domestic to abroad. Other information channels are the things that we benefit from learning about observation of the Eurogang scene that we can incorporate hopefully beneficially the domestic context.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, one of the things that comes immediately to mind is in the area of both definition and methods, right? So that looking at gangs in the European context, I think, are getting outside of our own context. In the U.S., we've identified a great variability in terms of gang structures, right?
Yeah.
In the same place, at the same time, lots of different types of groups that we feel comfortable, and others would as well, identifying as street gangs. And I think the European context really helps us expand on that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's very helpful. I think that, you know, trying to study gangs and crime more generally in European context where there's this much broader safety net of social services makes a difference. I mean, when I was in Germany, I explored some of the programs they have for youth, and it's just stark contrast to what we do. And I think that's been really very interesting. And then in terms of methods, I mean, the purpose behind starting the Eurogang group was a perception that just as it had in the U.S., that there was kind of an incipient possibility of a problem, you know, developing there, and a desire to really avoid a lot of the problems that we saw with gang research in the U.S. And that meant trying to really foster not only research on street gangs there, but also foster the use of common definitions, and in particular trying to develop multi-method comparative research, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's not common in the U.S.
Yeah.
There's at least one project, maybe more in Europe, that's been able to combine these methods. So we wrote a number of different research proposals to try and make that happen.
Yeah.
The European Union and others were not interested in funding it, unfortunately. That's sad. So my dream is that somewhere there will be, you know, across different cities, countries, these kind of studies that are designed to incorporate multiple methods.
Another major piece that I see in your review, Yavita, is on evaluation and evaluation research. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of these sort of the the highlights and some of the lowlights, because certainly those deserve mentions as kind of cautionary notes as well.
Sure.
With some of the things that have been attempted over the course of time.
Right, yeah.
Because you've dealt with early intervention, detection early, and figuring out ways, and you've also dealt with an awful lot of suppression efforts and the investigation of things here. So
Right,
I think you have a really wide view
Yeah.
of things.
So
That's the fun thing about doing research, right?
Yeah.
You can never control what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Spend a lot of your time problem solving and trying to figure out the best way to respond. And so, and, doing evaluation research, I mean, there's a lot there you can't control.
Right.
And that's what makes it interesting and fun. So I would say the 2 or 3 projects that really stand out would be a study I did with Karen Hannigan and Karen Hannigan, primarily looking at a after-school day reporting center probation program in Los Angeles, and really looking at the effect of imposing that structure as well as providing services. And I think we had something like 12 different sites, and then there was a lot of variability in implementation. So by doing long-term follow-up, both in terms of their official records as well as self-report, we could really see that that program actually had a pretty positive effect, but only on high-risk boys, that there was clearly contamination going on between high-risk and low-risk kids, and that had the effect that you would predict, negative effect on low-risk kids, bringing all these kids together in one place. And then, the differences by gender I thought were really interesting. So it had a negative effect on girls. So, that was a project that really, I think further exposed me to the difficulties that nonprofits have in providing these services, and also how terribly difficult it is to maintain fidelity to the program design in the face of the real world problems that people have in terms of hiring and retaining staff and all of that. And I've just seen that over and over again. One of the truly fun research projects I did, again with Karen Hannigan and David Sloan from USC, was the evaluation of the civil gang injunctions. So there's another example of a law enforcement tool, very innovative. You look at it conceptually, you can think of 50 different reasons why it would be a bad thing, and a few reasons why it could have a positive effect, but no data to speak of that really allowed us to know that, although it of course is extremely popular in Southern California and used in various places across the country now. But there was an early project study by Jeff Gauger when he was at UCLA that by pooling the effect of these injunctions, I could see some very modest short-term positive impacts on official crime. And so we wanted to do surveys of neighborhood residents to see, because the idea was that this was at least presented at some point, that this was a tool for community prosecutions, a way of making neighborhoods feel safer, and it was all for the sake of the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
One of the titles of one of our pieces. And so we thought the way to do that was to ask neighborhood residents. And so we were able to set up this really nice model after trying very hard to get permission in LA to work with LAPD and LA law enforcement on this, and then was never quite able to. Couldn't get a no, but couldn't get to yes either. But fortunately, we had contacts out in San Bernardino, and they were planning on initiating a an injunction there. So we were able to work with them closely to get in, to conduct a survey and to kind of understand where they wanted to place this injunction. They're very space-based, so they're clearly outlined boundaries
Yeah.
of where the injunction is going to be imposed. We were able to understand what data they were using to try and set those boundaries. And we were able to kind of go in and also pick comparable neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Now, as it turned out, when they actually implemented the injunction, they caught one of our comparison areas in the injunction as well. But that, again, turned out to be just a marvelous opportunity, because it turned out that by expanding the area of the injunction from where they had intended to put it originally, they netted an area that had much lower levels of gang activity in it. And so by doing that comparison, both within injunction areas and across comparison areas, because we were able to kind of control or make our comparisons based on neighborhood disorder, right? So the less disordered injunction area, sure enough, didn't show positive effects, it showed negative effects, right? So yeah, no, that was fun. That was fun. It was hard to have to. I mean, we were sitting on the edge of our seats, actually waiting for them to get the injunction, because we'd already done our pretest.
Okay.
No, I'm seeing a couple different strands here within sort of the gang element. Now, do you see these as kind of, you put these in do you compartmentalize these things that now I'm doing evaluation, now I'm doing an assessment of a particular type of gang intervention, and now I'm doing Euro gang? Or are all these, in your mind, answered in one dominant question?
That's a good question. Probably both there. I mean, I think there are probably some themes that motivate the work. I think in particular looking at or being concerned about how responses to gangs can in fact boomerang, and what the mechanisms for that might be, and how that's closely tied to what we know a bit about but not enough about, and that is what goes on within gangs.
All right.
At all, and the group process that really, I mean, so study after study after study tells us that when youth are in gangs, when they're affiliated with gangs, they get these huge increases in crime and violence, right? All forms of crime, as well as violence. So why is that? What is that? What is the mechanism that makes that happen? And does it happen in the same ways in different types of gangs? So it really, the whole thing.
Matt who discovered that a gang that didn't have a social worker wasn't legit? I think I remember encountering this at one point. And they were sort of they weren't troublesome enough, so they needed to go out and create more havoc.
Right, the boomerang effect of street workers.
Right, yeah.
So that was it. That was his first book. Yeah,
Right.
Absolutely. And we learn a lot from that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, very
serious to for program providers, law enforcement, to not pay attention to the group aspects of gang. You know, I mean, we look at individual gang members. We survey individual gang members, but we miss so much about what those group dynamics are, and what it is about those group dynamics that make a group a gang. So those are the questions, the gaps that I see currently. I'd have to say.
And more of a kind of rapprochement between those who are dealing with gangs on sort of a day-to-day basis and the research community. Are they more receptive over the course of the years to people coming in and reviewing their records and saying, here's actually what's going on?
Well, I think that the field of the intervention field with the rhetoric and I think commitment to evidence-basedness
Yeah.
has really permeated that field.
Okay.
And so I think they see the need to be able to document what it is that they do, to
Yeah.
show how that translates into certain kinds of outcomes. So I think there is more openness. But I guess in my experience, I think service providers are often interested in being able to document
Okay.
and show
All right.
show that their belief in good works it actually holds up. I mean, there's
That's-
resistance to that, as we all resist evaluation with good reason, right?
We've kind of ticked through and kind of mentioned in passing a number of the pieces that you've authored over the course of the years. I feel compelled to get the Modern Gang Reader now in its 4th edition on the record as well.
Oh.
Now, do you look back on one or two or a couple of these as the ones that you think the ones that you really would prefer to be remembered for, the ones that you think should have the most salient impact?
Within the readers?
Within the ones that you've done, within the body of work that you produce, what are the
Oh.
pieces that you would look back on and you say that's the one that I think that's the one that I really like?
That's an interesting question. It's interesting that you raised the issue of the readers because I was happy to put that first one together just so that the work that I was citing all the time would be in the same
Yes.
place, right?
Yes.
It just made it so much easier. And I actually really wasn't teaching at the time, so I came to really appreciate it also when I...
But as a graduate student, I appreciate it because I didn't have to buy all the pieces to put together. I had this one nice compendium.
Yeah, and of course that was the time before you can access all these articles on the internet all the time.
Yes.
So really, having my hard Xerox copy really made a difference a lot. So that was a great experience too. I think Gil Geist wrote an introduction to that, and I just that was a good experience. So.
In terms of my body of work, I'd have to say the Street Gang Patterns and Policies book with Mac. Yeah, that really brought together pretty much most of what we knew.
Okay.
So I would say that one.
Okay. Thinking back on sort of the arc of your career and kind of thinking about people viewing this in the future, young graduate students or maybe undergraduates, is there anything that you may have done differently in retrospect, or a path not taken?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a question worth pondering, right?
Yeah.
I think that in terms of career moves, we always struggle with the issue of breadth versus depth and specialization, and I really have specialized a lot in what is arguably a fairly narrow area within our field. I feel like there's plenty left to be learned there, but I cannot think of a study that I've done that I wish I hadn't done. I've had so many great opportunities throughout my career, more than I could take advantage of. I mean, it's been just a really rich experience for me, and I think going back to my very early. Just the process of doing research. I just love it. So I certainly can't regret my years at USC. I mean, that was just like one great experience after the other, and I certainly came here at the right time. Through, of course, no fault of my own, it just kind of happened that there was a confluence of an opening on my part, recognition there's some things going on at USC, which kind of helped me to recognize that not having a secure
job position might be, detrimental.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it's like I moved here right before 9/11 when all the research funding dried up. So,
The timing.
Yeah, the timing was just,
Yeah.
again, really fortuitous.
Yeah.
So, to people starting out now,
Yeah.
I would say take opportunities. You never know where they
Alright.
lead.
Yeah.
And, they oftentimes, these are circuitous paths we take.
Yes.
And I've not been very strategic in my career at all.
Yeah.
I've been more responsive to opportunities and driven by my interests, and that's one way of doing it.
Sure.
but-
Yeah.
there are other ways too.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Can you give us a little bit about the contemporary state of gang research? What are its promises and its prospects?
Uh-huh.
As well as what might some of the major limitations that you think need to be overcome would be?
Yeah. So, that's, so I think the why question is the biggest question
Yeah.
in front of us.
Yeah.
These kind of, we, since that period of very rich qualitative research in the 60s and 70s, we moved with the advent of the causes and correlate studies, these great
Yeah.
longitudinal projects that provided this wealth of data, including, I'd say, Fins Espensen's great studies. A number of other people started to mine the ad health data sets for individual survey-based data that can tell us very little about the group nature of gangs. And so I think what is really this wide gap
Yeah.
that exists in gang research. Now we're at the point where I don't really know how much further survey research is really going to take us.
Yeah.
I hate to say that, but
Right.
I'm sure it has not been done,
Yeah.
all been done. But I think that the ability to capture group dynamics, the way they're fostered, and the way they play out in different forms of gangs over
Yeah.
time and over place is really
So this would be
an important
this would be
area.
a need for qualitative kinds
Yeah.
of okay.
Yeah, I would say mixed methods.
Yeah, okay. Right.
And especially pursuing mixed methods in different locations at the same time.
All right.
So strategically kind of implemented research designs with multiple methods.
All right. Is that because all gangs aren't created the same, or they
Yeah.
have different kinds of? There's been I feel compelled to also get on the record that there does seem to be more attention paid to female gangs at this particular point in time as well. This seemed to be kind of an emergent dynamic. So,
You think so, really?
yeah, I'm thinking girls in the gang and
Right.
Campbell's work and.
Right, yeah, but look at how far back that was.
Right.
Right? Yeah. So, I think Jody Miller's work in this area just absolutely broke new ground. I mean, I think that the way she had of looking at gendered strategies to kind of negotiate gang life
Yeah.
was a quantum leap.
Yeah.
I mean, to me that's one of the biggest innovations in gang research for the last several decades.
Are there few-
And those are the kinds of things that I look for, right?
Right.
It's like really different ways of looking at this problem.
Are there
Yeah,
other things on the frontier that you think are kinds of interesting and intriguing questions that could be fodder for further innovation as well?
So, I hate to like
Because
hop on a popular
I
bandwagon, but I think that if we could figure out a way to study the use of social media and internet,
yeah,
and especially in a way that really allows us to somehow compare, to think about what difference that makes.
yeah,
What
Yeah.
happens when a conflict is not face to face? Especially in a gang dynamic that is so chaotic and so, I'm just driving by and I see you and I don't like the way you're looking at me, right? that's the catalyst for homicide. So those territorial challenges, the affiliation challenges, how this gets played out in this other world. I'm not reacting to you face to face. I think that's legitimately interesting.
Yeah.
Especially if it's kind of pursued in a way that allows us to reveal those gang dynamics, those interactional dynamics, how it is I'm playing out my identity. How is it that I'm deriving status from this or something that I'm not getting someplace else, right?
Yeah.
That to me is really intriguing.
Yeah, because you almost have a false or a secondary identity online. It's a virtual identity in a way. It really
That's
is.
what they
That is
say, right?
Right.
And it can be manipulated in a different
Right.
way than my identity
Yeah.
on the street.
And it
right?
needs to be defended in different kinds of ways, I suppose, too.
I suppose.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's a good topic for dissertation,
Yeah,
right?
right, yes.
Try and get my students interested in that. But I mean, that's clearly the frontier that's being entered now.
Right,
I mean,
right.
you see more and more on
Yeah.
that, and students interested in pursuing it. So.
And stepping back, or stepping outside of sort of the gang niche, if you will, thinking about the field broadly or generally, do you have any thoughts on its development, both intellectually and professionally? You've seen quite a few of these.
Yeah,
Some of them
I
which
feel like
I
I've been around the block once or
Sure.
twice. I think as long as our field, I mean, I'd have to say, ASC is definitely my professional home and has been, almost from the beginning. I kind of straddled sociology and criminology for a brief period of time before I really dove into criminology. But as long as we have the Jody Millers, the Ruth Petersons, the Rob Sanson, Mike Gottfredson, and many, many people in my department, right? The Susan Turners, the John Hipsett, Charles Kubrin, Elliot Curry. I mean, it's a very healthy field,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Very healthy.
Yeah.
So
It's also pursuing kind of a new identity in a bit way. Right? You're in a school of social ecology, right?
am indeed.
Yes.
Whatever that means.
That's right. Exactly. So that means you get to sort of pick from an all-star list of people who
Absolutely.
are coming or trained in
Right.
different domains.
Absolutely.
That meet here and
Yeah.
speak different languages.
Right. So our department has amazing breadth in terms of the disciplinary training that people have, and this continuum across criminology, law, and society just makes for such an interesting intellectual environment. And here we are housed within the tradition of generating research to solve social problems, right?
Yeah.
To make a difference. And so there's this support for policy relevant research, policy work that you wouldn't find everywhere, really. And so it's just a wonderful place.
Yeah. Well, I see.
Absolutely.
The back half of your vita seems like it's dedicated to just all the work that you've done in policy kinds of environments. But it's just sort of a laundry list of the sort of the who's who of. That's
Well, like I said, I've had a lot of opportunities,
Right.
and I always try and take advantage of them, right?
Yeah, but I think it in some ways that probably requires you to be able to kind of cross boundaries from academia as well as into sort of policy-oriented settings as well. That creates all sorts of intriguing kinds of interplay with ideas and the expression of those ideas. I suppose the last.
Very insightful, thank you.
Right.
I hadn't really thought of it that way, but
Right. Last question here is sort of one that we like to conclude with. Is there anything that I may have failed to include on the record or ask or inquire about that you think needs to be kind of presented here? Sort of the story of you and your career and your the ideas that you've been promoting and privy to?
Yeah. No, I would just add, I think that, as I've had the opportunity to think about really these two halves of my career, when I think of like soft money, full-time research at USC, and then moving into a more traditional academic appointment here at UCI, one of the things that's really continued throughout, and that is my joy in working with graduate students.
Yeah.
That's been really fun. Yeah, I really like that a lot. So, and doing the kind of research that I do has really provided a lot of opportunities to work with graduate students in different ways, because the different environments that I've been able to go in, from coding homicide cases to interviewing youth and staff in juvenile institutions, and really going throughout the country, interviewing public officials, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So that's been a really rewarding part of my career, I say, and then the opportunity to work with the colleagues that I've been able to.
Speaking of which, I'd be remiss if I failed to get your thoughts on what makes your collaboration with Dr. Klein such a productive kind of interaction. What is it that makes this as productive as it is?
Oh, well, because I spend all my time trying to catch up to him. It's what it is.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'd have to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, when we were working on the Street Gang Patterns book, he would just churn out these chapters, and I would just work really hard to try and get one going, and then another one, and that kind of thing. No, he's always been a joy to work with. He's really supportive, and has always been supportive of me, of course. But I mean, he's also just really a fun person to be around.
Yeah,
So, really interested in a lot of different things, and has great stories to tell. And
I'm glad he didn't make good on the promise to quit gangs.
Really.
So I suppose with that, I'd like to thank you for your
It's a
time
good
and
place to end.
inviting us out here to record a conversation with you.
Well,
And
sure. Thank you very much.
Look forward to sharing this with the rest of our audience here.
That's been fun.
Yeah.